I discovered Sherlock Holmes when I was 10, although always a book reader. It was to Enid Blyton's famous Five and the Secret Seven to which my deductive leanings were whetted before discovering the great detective. It happened that a few times a year my brother and I would be taken to my granny's. It was usually a boring couple of hours, apart from our open coal fire that I loved to throw paper and pretty much anything into, even plastic soldiers. Ah, those war-wounded, mutilated soldiers of my army. Watson's wounds had nothing on them. But I digress. My mother, duty done, would take us back to our own home full of toys. This particular visit was during the winter, and it was so cold. Well, this was Scotland, and that fire was extra appealing. And whilst looking languidly through my granny's bookshelf, full of Catherine Cooksons and Jackie Collins, I found a copy of the complete Sherlock Holmes. This was the year before Jeremy Brett's TV series started, so my previous knowledge of Sherlock really was those fantasy Basil Rathbone films of the 1940s, which didn't and still don't do it for me. Tisk tisk, turning Dr. Watson into a bumbling fool indeed. Looking across the table of contents, I came across a story title which piqued my curiosity. The Adventure of the Six Napoleons. Having just read about the Battle of Waterloo, I thought, is this the same Napoleon? It must be. Nobody I've ever heard of is otherwise called Napoleon, certainly not in Glasgow. I started reading the story, and it was a magical experience like a rainbow after a shower. And those first words of a Sherlock tale to enter my existence. It was no very unusual thing for Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard to look in upon us of an evening, and his visits were very welcome to Sherlock Holmes, for they enabled him to keep in touch with all that was going on at the police headquarters. I was hooked. The next day found me at the library like a literary velociraptor, waiting to devour all things Sherlockian, and I wasn't disappointed. The next few weekends found me scouring second-hand bookshops, determined to find a good cheap copy of the complete Sherlock Holmes. It took me 2 weeks, but at the Barras Market, and anyone from Glasgow will know it well, I found a tattered and well-loved copy, and it came with an additional bonus. In the inside cover, it was inscribed, "To Sarah from Dad. Hope he brings you as much joy as he does for me. Christmas, 1958. Years later, when I left home to go to uni, I took that book and many others to a charity shop for others to love. I still have a tinge of regret for not keeping my Sherlock book, but I'm happy that before taking it to the shop, I wrote, next to Dad's comment, I hope the next owner finds as much joy as Sherlock and Dr. Watson have given me, Steve, August 1993. I have owned various Sherlock books since then, including a first edition copy of the memoirs, but nothing gave me as much pleasure as that first copy. In starting this YouTube channel, it gives me a chance to share my love for the canon, and especially all those writers who have wrote beyond the stories. But for all of us, including you dear listeners, we all have a top 5 stories, and I want to tell you mine's and the reason behind my choices. And I also want to make this a regular for the show, in which you write, tell me how you discovered Sherlock, and your top 5. I would love to read them out. My top 5, in descending order. 5. The Bruce Partington plans. Finding bodies on the tube and the rail tracks were nothing new by the time Sherlock first appeared in The Study in Scarlet. Indeed, in 1881, Britain's first wanted poster appeared after the murder of an Isaac Gold on a train from London to Brighton, and his murderer, Percy Lefroy Mapleton, was the subject of a manhunt and had his picture appear in the newspapers. For me, the tube is very underused in the canonical tales, with a trip to Aldersgate and the Red-Headed League perhaps the other most memorable mention. I love the way the methodical Holmes follows the clues, almost like Bread Trail in Hansel and Gretel, and then traps the villain. 4. The Blue Carbuncle. It's a Christmas favourite, and I know a few Sherlockians who, every Christmas morning, without fail, read this tale. And it's another breadcrumb trail. I'm a bit predictable, hey? I do like it when the stories trail around London, and there's probably no better descriptive story of Victorian London in the canon. 3. The Sign of 4. Of the 4 novels, this one has everything. Exotica, romance, adventure. It's almost a boy's own adventure. And best of all, Dr. Watson comes out with the ultimate prize with his beloved Mary Morstan. It makes full use of the Baker Street irregulars, very much underused throughout the canon in my opinion. Also, Toby of sketchy bloodhound abilities, Inspector Athelney Jones, and contains the classic line of Sherlock. How often have I said to you that when we have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth? 2. The Adventure of the Six Napoleons. By the time Conan Doyle wrote this in 1904, he was so tired of Holmes that it's a credit to his skilled penmanship that this incredible tale met the readership of a Sherlock-hungry public. And blessed for us all was the incentive of a big fat financial wad being waved in front of Doyle's face. This tale begins and ends in Baker Street. I always like my tales to begin there with a good description, like, quote, cold winter's evening, etc. This is a story where we see Sherlock verbally sparring with the canon's most frequently occurring detective, Lestrade. The busts, you can never get those busts out of your head, is perhaps my favourite line from the story. It was the first Sherlock I ever read, and it almost makes it to number 1. But by only a whisker comes my top story. Number 1. The Red-Headed League. This is a story that makes us want to know more about the exploits of John Clay. What other crimes did he commit? And what of his Robin Hood-esque type exploits? We also see, on the row of shops next to the bank, a vegetarian restaurant. I was a naive youngster not to know such things existed back in the Victorian era. It's perhaps also the greatest trick in the canon in inventing a society to aid the removal of a pawnbroker for a few hours each day whilst digging took place. And of the crime itself, it inspired a real-life bank job in Baker Street in 1971 after the robber had read the Red-Headed League. Taking place at a bank just 100 metres or so away from the Sherlock Holmes Museum in Baker Street, the robbers tunnelled into the bank vault from a couple of shops down, robbed the place, and even left a message on the vault wall saying, "Let's see how Sherlock Holmes solves this one." Needless to say, the descendants of Lestrade, London's finest, made short work of it after the robbers made a criminal blunder worthy of the stupidest criminals that Doyle's pen could have thought up. One of them leased the shop that was used to start the tunnel under his own name. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and as I said, I want this to be a regular feature. If you want to share and have it read out, I want to hear your favourite stories and how Sherlock came into your lives. write in on Sherlock Holmes Beyond the Stories at AOL.com. The email is in the show notes. Well, that's it for another episode. Until next time, bye bye.